Hi there, my name is Redo Meyer.
And I'm Ian Nee Lewis.
And we're going to be taking a look at the technology behind a device profile switcher apps Tasker, NFC Task Launcher, and Profile Widget.
So stick around to find out what features and technical tips and tricks it takes to make a device profile app today on
the App Clinic. So we're going to take a look at these three apps today, and they're all fairly similar in what they're trying to do, which is excellent because it makes it much easier for us to talk about the technology that really makes them great.
It's also great because we really relate to these apps. I think that these apps, although they have an appeal to everyone, I think everyone would like the functionality that these apps provide, but it turns out that the people that actually use them are mostly hackers and software engineers.
It's true, and that's actually something which we're going to see as we go through each of these apps. You can almost see who the target audience ends up being, and so I think much like the evolution of most technologies and mobile phones most recently, you sort of start off with something that appeals to a kind of a geek crowd, and then if you create something which just anyone can use to make their life easier, it's going to become massively popular. So we're going to look at how these apps are approaching those problems and how we think they can do a good job of taking that one step further. So we're going to start off by looking at the standard features. So these are the things that all of these apps can do. And so this is basically the key core functionality that we would consider that you need in order to make a device profile switching app.
Yeah, let's talk about what a device profile switching app is.
It's a mouthful.
Right? It is definitely that. Well, it's just because I call them task apps.
Okay, well, let's call them task apps.
You know what? I don't call them anything.
Maybe that's the problem. You call them task apps.
Maybe they're auto apps. I don't know.
Apps.
Yeah. The thing about device profile is I think the terminology comes from the idea of having your device in a completely different state for certain things. And we certainly introduced that concept when we started looking into docks. The idea is you'd have one profile when you're undocked versus another profile while you're docked. But these apps that we're looking at today go far beyond that. And I think it's almost hard to talk about a specific profile because there are multiple overlapping things that each app can do.
Absolutely.
But the core of it is we're going to change something in the system or possibly just do something in the system. When you execute an action when the conditions of the system change.
Exactly, and so the idea here is that rather than having sort of a single toggle, you're able to say, I'm at home, I'm at work, I am entering a meeting, whatever your profile case is, and execute a whole bunch of different settings changes or launch a bunch of apps, and as Ian says, basically perform a series of actions in relation to that change in environment. So they can all change the volume and ringtones, they can all change brightness, they can all modify your connectivity settings as well. Some of the apps, I think Tasker in particular, go significantly further than that, but these are sort of the core things that I think anyone downloading one of these apps is going to want to be able to do. Mute the volume, change your ringtone, alter the screen brightness based on time of day or location.
And in addition to that, although it doesn't really fit into the profile idea, I think I would add sending alerts and notifications, SMSs, things like that.
Absolutely. And so these three apps, like we say, they have these things in common, and I kind of like to think of them as three variations on a theme. I'm going to see this as we go through. Tasker is kind of like a self-driving car. You spend a lot of time setting it up, and once it's going, you just sit there and it does everything for you.
You know, I wonder if that's a really good analogy or if it's going to resonate, because while everyone can understand the experience of getting in a self-driving car, I mean, everyone's been driven by someone, only people like you and I know what it takes to set up a self-driving car.
This is very true.
Hours in the morning.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, you got to plug things in. We shouldn't go into.
Right.
NFC Task Launcher is kind of like driving an auto. It does most of the hard work for you, but you still need to initiate the action. You still need to do something, and you still have some element of control. Profile widget goes the other way. You basically have to initiate it yourself entirely, choose which widget to click, which profile you want to switch to. So you have to kind of be conscious of that rather than just being able to use a particular location. So let's talk a little bit about what we want from the app. So we've talked about what they can do what they all should do. And how they sort of vary at a very high level. So what are the things that you want to see in an app like this for it to be your go-to?
Well, I think the most important thing that I want is for it to be able to control everything. I don't want any part of my system to remain untouched by this app. Now, of course, that, as we talked about yesterday, we had a long conversation about permissions and how wanting to control everything imposes some really interesting restrictions and responsibilities on the developer of the app. But I want it to do everything. I don't want there to be anything that I can do to the phone that this app can't, because I want it to be an agent or a proxy for me. I also want to make sure that it can combine multiple events and multiple actions with multiple conditions, because the sort of profile that I can use to tell you that I'm at work, for instance, unless it's got machine learning along the lines of Google Now, only next year's version of Google Now, it probably doesn't know that I'm at work. It probably doesn't know that I'm in a meeting. I need to be able to tell it that, yeah, when I'm attached to this Wi-Fi network during these hours of the day, and possibly some other conditions, that's when I need to be not disturbed, or that's when I can accept text messages. So I need to be able to push all of those into one container. And several of the apps that we looked at have this functionality, but only in the Pro version. So that's something to look for.
Absolutely.
Now, the other thing that you need, I think you mentioned, is these things are really difficult to set up.
Yes, they are. And that's, I think, the core thing here is that it's something which, if you describe the functionality to people, is kind of obvious. And there's been things like this built into mobile phone operating systems for a long time, on and off. This notion of being able to, click a button, change a setting, and you're at home at work, receiving calls, not receiving calls. But I think the challenge has always been presenting this in a way that just regular people can use. At the moment, and we'll see, it varies for each of these apps, but at the moment you've got that tendency to feel like you're having to program the phone. Right, and that's what you want to get away from. So when we say easy to use, what we mean is easy to configure, especially. The actual use case, I think, for all three is pretty straightforward, but the configuration is the trick. And so we really want to make it as easy as possible. And that kind of relates to the last point.
Yeah, there's really two ways that you can make this easy to use. You can either make it very easy to program, which, if you figure out how to do that, let me know.
Yeah, that could be some money in that.
Yeah, there's a ton of money. This is, I used to program games, and one of the things that we would always say is, boy, I don't want to program all this gameplay. It seems like the designers should be able to do that. And so, multiple projects this happened to me. I wasn't always the one calling the shots, but you make a scripting language and give it to the designers, and they're like, oh, thanks. And then they come to you and say, hey, can you write this script? And you realize, wow, I just spent a huge amount of time making this scriptable, and I'm going to have to write all the code to script it. And that's the feeling that I get with these apps is, for a software engineer or someone who's used to thinking in terms of code, these are very easy to use. I mean, some of them are more cumbersome than others navigation-wise, some of them are prettier than others, but the concepts are easy. At the same time, for most people, I think it's going to be like programming a VCR, which is, you want to do it, you know what you want, but you're never going to do it. You're never going to figure that out, right?
Well, there'll be one person in the house who figures it out, and that's it. They're
exactly.
the go-to. Can you set up?
No, one person in the extended family, and you don't want to be that guy.
You don't want to be that guy.
So let's take a tip from the VCR world. You remember that this was very, very difficult until things like TiVo came along, and what they were doing was leveraging the information that was on the internet or in the community to help, instead of saying, I want to program this amount of time, you could say, yeah, I want to watch this show.
Yeah, which is always what you want to do, right? No one just randomly wants to record half an hour of television sometime on Friday night. There is a thing, there is something on that they want to record.
Usually, yeah.
Generally.
So it turns out that the best way to solve this is to have a community repository. So I can go to the internet and say, oh yeah, someone else had a problem where they don't want to receive alarm notifications between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., and yet they still want their clock to be able to send them an alarm. And I pull down that code and install it into the task application that I'm using, and boom, I got what I wanted, and I didn't have to learn how to program the thing. So the ease of use is important, but you can get away with less ease of use if you have a better repository of community scripts that people can very easily browse and install.
Exactly, and this gets to one of the points which we tend to make again and again. It's one of these recurring themes, is you want to make it really easy for people to see the value of your app within the first 30 seconds of installing your app. So if they can press a couple of buttons as soon as the app is opened and say, oh, okay, cool. So this is now going to mute my volume between, after 9 o'clock at night, before 6 in the morning, and maximize my alarm. That's perfect. That's going to be useful for me. I can use this right away, and it gets their minds thinking as to how else they may use it. If all you're presenting them with is a blank canvas, hit plus to create a new action, and then you've got this massive array of controls for literally everything. If the app is doing the right thing, it's daunting. It's like, I don't know how I would even want to use this, and they'll move on. So make that initial action of learning the app and understanding how to use it as simple and easy as possible, and you get a lot of mileage out of that.
So let's take a trip to the top of the power curve and possibly the bottom of the ease of use curve with Tasker. Okay, as you know, a feature graphic is a great way to grab people's attention and let them know in a nutshell what your app is about. And Tasker doesn't have a feature graphic,
No, it
which
doesn't. That's
is
unfortunate.
which is very sad. So I've gone ahead and tried to take the liberty of creating a quick mock-up. Now, you know, I'm not an artist, and so this doesn't have the flair of, let's say, a Roman Nurek design. But
We'll get stuff
I
somewhere.
think it captures almost perfectly what the average user can expect when they start Tasker. Yeah, you like that?
That's pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
That's,
All that
it's
for-
got glow. It's got big text, which you'll like. Yeah, I think it's representative.
Yeah, and a beautiful photo.
Absolutely.
Only 14 iStock photo credits.
Nice.
The point is, the point that I'm trying to make, I mean, I'm being a little unkind, but it's just like an airliner. It might be the best way to get you where you want to go, but there's a good chance that you're not actually qualified to take the wheel and fly it yourself. And I
Absolutely.
think that's the way most people are going to feel about Tasker.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about Tasker. It is an app which does everything, literally everything. But it is a little like sitting down in the console of the 747 the first time you open it up.
Bingo.
So you spent a little more time looking at this app, didn't you? So let's,
Oh yeah. It's a great app, and oh yeah.
Let's switch sides.
Look at that. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. All right. So Tasker is tackling a really difficult job. The mission of the Tasker app is to let you define what your phone does in any specific set of circumstances, and it wants to let you define those circumstances as precisely as possible and give you as many things to do in those circumstances as possible. So for instance, you might want to turn off Wi-Fi when you leave your house, or turn off Bluetooth when your battery gets low, or even, and this is something Tasker can do, automatically respond to text messages when you're in the car. Send a little text saying, sorry, I'm driving and can't respond to you, which I think is awesome.
That's very nice, yeah.
I actually used Tasker for several months myself. I don't think I'm as big of a fan as these apps as you are. I have no idea why. I think it's just because I have very irregular habits.
I think that's the key to these apps, is they presume that you are going to want to respond to the same situations in the same way.
Right.
At the same general time.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I am irregular, lazy, and sort of, odd in my habits.
You're
and
a free spirit, Ian.
Right, exactly. And you're practically British. So depending on where you're coming from, you'll have a different experience with this. But there was a time in my life when our dear employer decided to turn on alarms for all calendar invites that came from our corporate email center, which meant that we got alarms set on all of our holiday reminders. So you get woken up at midnight going, oh, it's midnight, it's Christmas Eve, don't forget to sleep in tomorrow. That was a good time. So I specifically used Tasker to just turn off calendar notifications between like 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. and that worked out pretty well.
Nice.
But when you think about it, Tasker is really offering an environment for programming your phone. So it's not surprising that most of the people that love this app are software engineers, and using it feels like software engineering. In fact, you can actually write Android apps in Tasker. We're not going to cover that functionality. That's for a different
Probably
time
wise, yeah.
when we talk about on-device IDEs
Yeah,
someday.
that'll be a fun one.
So it's a very powerful program, and this is really the problem. With great power comes great usability issues. My complaint with Tasker, though, is not that it's difficult. I expected that. It's that it's more difficult than it has to be. So let's switch to the giant phone. And
Alright, see if it comes
and we
up.
can
Now,
swap
you're
places.
gonna swap back?
And yeah.
This is
because
this is
you
getting a
know.
little crazy. Whoop,
Yeah.
You're gonna trip yourself over on my mic.
Awesome.
cord.
I said wireless mics, and everybody said no, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
you reminded
And
me
I
of
said
one.
I'm buying them anyway, and then they sucked. And okay.
So now, after last week's issues, some people said that we shouldn't use the giant phone. They said that it's too much phone for us to handle, that a smaller, more discreet phone might suit us better. To them, I say, witness the power of our fully operational giant phone.
Which I can handle just fine. Okay.
Oh, that's disturbing.
Yes. So, leaving aside the issues that we have with navigation, legacy buttons, and just general Android design guideline issues, let's just focus on the meat of Tasker. Let's actually define a task. So, when I start up, the first thing I see is 3 tabs. It says Profiles, Tasks, and Scenes. Now, as a user, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I know I want to do tasks. At least that's what I thought, right?
Oh, that's Tasker,
now,
right?
I think that other people might say, oh, I want to define a profile, right? It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah. I think it depends on how familiar you are with the programs and the terminology that goes around it. Because it's
Right.
not always obvious to me what's a task and what's a profile.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, it turns out in Tasker, a profile is a set of contexts that contain tasks.
Okay.
Now, you'll notice there is no context button. Instead, there is a scenes button, which actually sounded like a content, like, oh, maybe if I'm in this scene, perhaps
change
I
the
have become an actor in this scene. When I exit stage left,
Are we all not actors on the stage of life?
I will be pursued by a bear. So, acting! So I immediately went to scenes because that made sense. Now it gives me a helpful pop-up, which essentially says, please do not press this button again.
Wait, why did you press the button? Stop pressing it.
Yes, but it turns out that scenes are actually the GUI designer for writing your own applications in the Tasker design language.
Okay, that's kind of cool. Before
it is
while
cool.
you've got that up as well,
yeah.
what I wanted to point out, modal dialogue, please don't do modal dialogues. Particularly when it's a modal dialogue popping up over an empty screen. So I mean, there is nothing here. So if you want to display some information, that's the place to put it, not on a pop-up.
Well, and that's really the issue that we're going to see over and over again, is that this is a very modal dialogue-based application. And I think part of it, especially when you look at the buttons, I think you can see that this was definitely designed in the Eclair era.
Yeah.
And that used to be, I think, a better way of doing things than it is now. I think we have much better design language now than we did
I
at
think
that
the problem
time.
was at that time it was quite ambiguous. It was really up to you, and if you wanted your app to look good, you really needed to do it all yourself. And I can see that they've put some effort in here to try and make it look better than the stock Gingerbread Eclair stuff. Unfortunately, now it starts to look a little dated. And look, I understand. We all definitely understand why people have been reluctant to update their app with every single version of Android. But since since Android 3, things have been pretty consistent. We've added new things, but if you create an app which is consistent with those design guidelines, I think you'll find something which is going to look good for a while to come.
So I'm really excited to see what Roman has to say about this, but I will point out that there are some great apps on Google Play right now that shine a little bit more in this area. Now, I haven't found anything with the power of Tasker, but for instance, there's an app called Automate It, which uses almost an identical paradigm, but it allows me to swipe between the different pages. And as I do different actions where Tasker uses modal dialogues, Automate It uses drop-downs, and it uses, what do we call those things where they sort of open up?
Like an expanding list view?
Exactly. So they use expansions. One really obvious place, for instance, is when you choose a location on Automate It, then it expands a map view directly underneath the piece of script that you're working on.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it actually takes you to a completely different screen.
All right, so it's just providing you the context without breaking your workflow.
Exactly.
I like that.
Again, not a huge big deal, just a some things that could be polished there. The important thing is helping people to understand how these things actually work.
Yeah.
Now, these little modal dialogues that pop up are certainly better than nothing, but could be better. Now, it is pretty obvious, though, what I need to do to add a profile. I don't really want to click the plus button down here. I probably would have rather had it in the list, but that's a quibble. I do like that the new profile name is optional. Great. I can click right past it without having to think of something to type in and have all of my profiles named QWE. So the first context it's going to give me, it's naming it first context, but it's giving me some options for context, and this is essentially the conditions under which you're going to run. So for instance, I'm going to want to be, let's say, during a particular time. Time entry is painful, more our fault than theirs.
Yeah, it's our fault, but we fixed it, so please hide our shame.
Exactly. So okay, I'll say it's in this, and then I'm going to do a task at that particular time. Again, optional name, thank you. And a task contains actions, and then actions go into a huge amount of work. Now, one nice thing is, of course,
this is everything. I mean,
right.
There's everything you could want to do here.
Exactly, and it's categorized.
Nice.
So that's good. I mean, there's probably over 100 options here, and I don't have to look at all of them at once. So maybe I want to do a particular task, or
Did I see
change
ifs and elses?
There are ifs and elses all over.
This really is kind of a programming language for programming your phone rather than programming apps.
There are, in fact, even variables that you can set, etc., etc.
So I see the challenge here. So the Tasker guys, or guy, I'm not sure how many people are involved, but they're basically trying to implement a GUI-based programming language for altering your phone's behavior on the fly.
Exactly.
And that's apparently hard. That's not really surprising.
It's a relatively difficult activity.
So we really are asking them to say, look, we love the functionality of your Jumbo Jet, but we'd like to have just sort of a steering wheel and maybe a brake pedal and an accelerator.
Well, this is where I think the Tasker could make the most difference, is in having a usable repository that can be the first thing that I see. So instead of seeing the ability to program things coming up initially, I'd rather see a bunch of stuff that other people have programmed.
Well, this is the way a lot of people learn how to write code in a new language.
Sure.
It certainly is for me. I'm not so much the read all of the API docs first before I get started. I'm more like, let me download a sample app that does something in the vague vicinity of what I want, and I'm just going to mess with it.
I think it's telling that, for instance, the JavaScript guys we work with, they say, they'll never obfuscate source code, because otherwise how would anyone learn JavaScript?
Exactly.
And I answer, no one learns JavaScript. So, I don't want to get too far into it, but
rabbit hole too
far. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, though, was actually, let me finish by adding some random access. Okay, so they do have conditions on everything, but it makes the defining a task a little bit difficult, because you need to define essentially an event. Now, they call them contexts, and they can be stateful in the sense that you can enter and exit them, but you basically have to say, in response to this event, do this task, but only if this other thing. And that's how most of the things are structured.
Okay.
And some of the other things that we looked at were a little bit more explicit as far as the conditionals. Right now, you'd actually have to burrow in to each conditional to see which one actually applied.
Gotcha.
Okay. So we could talk about Tasker for hours and hours. It's a wonderful program. You should definitely check it out. But let's go ahead and move on to something that's maybe a little bit easier to configure.
Yeah, it's a little easier for you. Before we do, I just wanted to do a really quick call out. Thank you for blocking the photo of me. One of the things about an app like Perfect, it's like whoa, what's the photo? What's being overlaid? One of the beautiful things about Tasker and a lot of these apps is that they function based on location.
Right.
So whether you're at home or at work or whatever else. And so it's really, really important in that context to be as efficient as possible in your location updates, because this is just something which is going to help you give you a shortcut. No one wants to sacrifice hours of battery life to be able to save themselves 2 or 3 seconds of clicking things. I have a deep dive into location on the Android developers blog, which you can check out, which can give you some of the details there.
There's also a section on the Tasker Wiki,
Oh,
which,
nice.
by the way, so it's not that they don't have a community. It's that they have a community with a wiki where you can download XML and presumably load it into Tasker somehow. So it's not that
Kinda
it's not
halfway there.
friendly. It's just that it's not friendly for normal people.
Yeah, okay.
So they have a section called Location Without Tiers, which also goes over some of this and has some very interesting Tasker-specific info.
Perfect. All right, so let's have a look at the next app, which is NFC Task Launcher from TagStand. Now they have, as you can see, a lovely feature graphic. Gives you an idea of how it's going to work. It's kind of artistic. I kind of like it. Don't know if you necessarily need to have the phone on there, but in this instance it kind of makes sense because it's showing how the app gets used. There's an
Bingo.
NFC tag there. You hold your phone over it. That's how the magic happens. Now, I actually have used this app quite a bit. I had a big set of suggestions from my initial experience working with the app, getting everything configured. And since I had everything configured the way I wanted to, I haven't really had to go through that process again. So I opened up the app just to confirm my thinking. And it turns out that they've fixed pretty much everything I was going to tell
It's
them.
good being Ray Tomeyer, isn't it?
I don't even think I told them. I just, it's...
I think you
it was
blogged
obvious.
about it and they just read your blog.
That's possible.
Yeah.
That's possible. But it's wonderful for me to see. Like the big questions I had was particularly around things like navigation, getting started, a lot of things that we've already talked about, and they've actually fixed a lot of what I was asking for. So, as a little bit of context, the way I use this app, I actually talked a little bit about it when I did a blog post about how I modded my Prius to be able to use my Nexus 7.
I love that you drive a Prius. That's so San Francisco.
It's so perfect. Well, if you're going to move,
Right.
move.
I, on the other hand, drive a Mack truck with windshield washers that squirt West Texas light crude.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that way you kind of get that rose-colored, tint to the world.
You're
Kind
not
of
going to kill
rosy.
many birds in your Prius. That's all I'm saying.
Well, no, you have to really aim. It's yeah. So this is how I use the app every day. So in my car, as you can see there, I've got a tablet. There's an NFC sticker stuck on that mount. So when I put the tablet in there, it turns on navigation, it turns on Wi-Fi, and connects to the hotspot, which is enabled when I put my phone into the center console. So again, I've got a sticker stuck underneath the little tray for my mobile phone, and that turns on the hotspot for my Nexus 7. It also turns on the Nexus 7 music, so as soon as I sit down, put it there, I start getting my music, which is lovely. When I get to work, I have an NFC tag stuck under the bottom of my desk. I've got a little X marked on my desk. I pop my phone there. It turns off my volume, connects to the office Wi-Fi, and does a bunch of other stuff
So
like
you're
that.
able to get it through your desk.
Yeah, it's like an inch of, I guess, really, really light wood, but it gets through, which is nice. At home, where I put my wallet and keys, again, I have an NFC tag, so I just pop my phone against that, connects to the home Wi-Fi, does all of the other things I need at home. And then the last thing is I have a little coaster, which I stuck an NFC tag to, sits next to my bed, boom, pop it there when I go to sleep, mutes everything, turns on the alarm, etc., etc. So it's really automating a lot of the stuff that I do sort of every day. And once you've set it up once, you never really need to think about it.
It's genius. And actually, I tried to do this very same thing. I ran into a few problems. I realized that actually this app works a lot better if you're consistently sober. So that was
Well,
an
yeah,
issue.
there is an aim issue. Yeah,
Right.
There is that.
But also the one thing I noticed, and this really isn't an issue with this app per se, it's more the operating system in general. I would love to see us add this, is the app needs to be installed. So for instance, I thought, I'll put a Wi-Fi sticker for my guest network next to the door. That was one of the things the app suggested. Then I went to the sticker, and it turns out first thing it needs to do is download the app because there's no general set up a Wi-Fi NFC intent.
Which is a shame. Which, in a way, is a shame because that would be really useful, but it would also make this app less useful. So, it's chicken and egg. You almost want to stick like a barcode onto the NFC tag so you can scan the barcode, which will install the app, which will then let you use the tag. But that
No,
seems-
it does actually install the app.
Oh,
But the
great.
problem for me was, if I'm bringing somebody over to use my guest network, and the first thing they need to do is install an app, how are they going to get to the network to install the app?
It's going to be a challenge.
Right. You might say via mobile network, come on, this is the Bay Area.
Yeah.
What if
Yeah,
they're on
this is true.
AT&T?
Yeah, and then
just-
they're out of they're sore out of
In
luck.
my house, yes, they are.
Yeah, I guess this is particularly useful if you happen to have a Nexus Q, so you need to get onto the right network. So you could have the tag there, and you don't have to worry so much about sort of Wi-Fi in general, but for a specific Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we're rabbit holing again.
Indeed.
So I want to move on real quick. So happily, now we're going to have to switch. We did this really well.
Yeah.
You should go in front.
All right.
Excellent. Yay. So like I said, I had a whole bunch of suggestions for these guys, but as it turns out, I can go through this pretty quickly because most of what I wanted them to do, they now do. So the welcome is really nice. This I think works really well. This is what happens when you load the app for the first time. You have a little welcome dialog. It explains how to use the app, what it's there for, but it's not modal. It's not going to stop you from doing anything else, and you can dismiss it after you've read it the first time. So I actually really like this as an introduction to an app. I think it works really, really well. Once you do dismiss this, you have pre-existing suggestions. You have all of these profiles which have descriptive names. So you go, this is for work, this is for home, this is for daytime, nighttime. These things which you can immediately say, okay, well, yeah, that sounds like exactly what I want to do. I downloaded this app so that I could shut down everything when I went to sleep, and so I'm going to choose this and see what happens. And then once you select any of those, you can then continue to modify them. But it gives you a start. It gives you as a user an idea for how am I going to use this and what do I need to do in order to get sort of the obvious things working. So we'll jump back to the giant phone, and I'll bring up NFC Task Launcher. Perfect. So it's all got a really nice modern holotype UI, still customized. It's got this sort of orange theme, which is similar in color to the gingerbread orange, but nicer.
It's
it actually looks
yeah,
good.
exactly.
It's a different shade. They're consistent with their iconography.
More creamsicle, less pumpkin. Yeah.
Indeed. And you can see here, you've got all these locations. So these are popular tags which people have created and configured. You've got your nice icons, and that was one of the things I wanted to say. Once you've created your own tags, they're listed here under My Tags, but you lose the cool icons. Like, I would like to be able to have that as a shortcut. It's a small thing, but it just makes it a little bit easier, particularly if you have a lot of these, to be able to easily recognize them if you want to edit them. Now, of course, you're not actually going to be using the UI that much because it's one of those you set it up once, you leave it forever type scenarios. So if we go through, we'll create a tag based on something else. So create a Wi-Fi network. That's probably a bad example because we need to actually have a Wi-Fi network. We'll go home. So it's going to change my ring type to normal and turn on Wi-Fi. That makes sense. And when you get to this point, it can almost get a little bit confusing. So we're going to say save and write. So I like that they've got the confirmation up the top here. That's great. And at this point, it gets a little bit confusing. So this is the point where you would put your phone against the tag to record this. Which once you do, it will vibrate, tell you it's done, which is great. But then to finish, you kind of have these two options. So on the one hand, up the top left it says finish, and on the top right it says done. And if you hit finish, it goes back, which is correct because it's actually the upper affordance that I'm clicking. So you do have to write done, but I just found that a little bit confusing. You almost don't want to use that word.
So in other words, this page is called finish.
Yes, it's the finish
and
page.
it has an up affordance.
Yes.
But it has also a done button.
Yes. And importantly here, this is...
Do they both do the same thing?
No. So if you hit the up affordance, it goes back. And that's kind of important here. So up in terms of Android means don't go to a sibling, go to a parent. Now these, basically what you're going through here is a wizard. And a wizard is a horizontal sibling flow. You're moving from equal stages along a path.
Yeah.
So back should take you back, up should take you out of this workflow. And in this case, it's basically the equivalent of cancel. So you probably don't actually want to do an up affordance here. You want to have basically a save and write, or I can't remember the name that Roman has been using for it, but the alternative where you basically have a save and a cancel right up the top here. So those are the two things that you can do.
Like a commit type of thing?
Yeah, exactly, like a commit or cancel at any point.
And in general, if you're going to do a wizard, the very best way to do it that users like is to just use a view pager. So, because it is weird to have a verb in your action bar.
In your title bar, exactly.
Yeah, in your title bar. So, but having that as a particular tab on a wizard, especially a wizard that you can swipe through, which is becoming a far more interesting and understood action than a back button, honestly. I mean, you'd think a back button's the easiest thing in the world,
Yeah.
but I've seen people with the back button right there trying to swipe.
Yeah,
Because as soon as you start thinking in a horizontal flow, you want to be able to swipe it view pager style.
Exactly, and that's the biggest. It's still one of the bigger challenges. Like, and particularly if you're using a view pager to swipe between things which aren't necessarily contextually identical. So if I swipe along this main page, it tells you where you can buy tags, which is a great feature because the first thing you go is, oh, that's great, but where do I get the tags from?
Right.
So this is nice, and you've got popular tags, my tags, and statistics to tell you how many actions you've performed and how much time.
So
you've
popular
theoretically
tags, is that
saved.
sort of a community repository? Can you upload your own?
Well, this
or
is what I'm
it,
not sure. I don't know that you can upload your own, so I'm not
Okay.
sure whether they mean popular as in used by a lot of people or popular as in asked for by a lot of people. So if they
Okay.
don't have a community repository, it would be wonderful to see that. But the trick here is that when I'm in by tags or if I'm over in statistics, mentally my context has switched. I'm no longer looking at tags, I'm looking at stats. And so my temptation is more frequently than I'd like to admit to hit back to go back to my tags, and then I exit the app and I'm angry and frustrated. So I don't necessarily have a great solution, but it's a risk of having contextually independent items all in the same view pager. So again, we're short on time, so I don't want to go into too much depth here. The one thing I did want to point out, so the difference between this and Tasker is fully automated. You set up your context and then you leave it in your pocket, it does it all for you.
Right.
This, you do need to hit the NFC tag, which is nice. The disadvantage here, of course, is that you have to be conscious of it. You have to have a tag in the right place. You have to manually do the tapping rather than just having it automatically. The advantage is that you don't need to have any services running. It's really efficient. Nothing needs to be running in the background. The app can be completely gone. And once you hit an NFC tag, it's still going to wake up and do what it needs to do, which is nice. So how would you go about building something like this? Well, you need to learn a lot about NFC. Really the key here is you need to learn to listen for tags and try and be as specific as possible as to the type of data that you're trying to listen for so that you're not colliding with other apps which are also listening for NFC data. There's a couple of really good Google I/O talks which you can check out. One from 2011 with Nick Pelly and Jeff Hamilton, which really give a great introduction to how NFC works, how you would build an app that works in a similar way to this. And then last year, there was another follow-up session to that, Up Close and Personal, which talked a little bit more about Android Beam, but again, gave more of an update into how NFC can be used for apps like this. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to buzz really quickly through a profile widget as well. So this is the kind of the fully automatic, or the fully manual version, I suppose. It's you have to know exactly what you're switching to. So with the
Right. So
NFCs,
it's got the task part, but not the detection part.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's probably one of the most simplistic of the three apps that we looked at, but in some ways it's almost a positive because should be a much smaller learning curve to get going.
Indeed. Well, especially as we talked about, deciding what profile I'm in is actually a really interesting machine learning task, which a lot of users wouldn't be able to program even if they knew how. So this is actually really attractive.
Exactly. So you can see they've got the nice profile graphic, which is great. Always like to see that, and that is a prerequisite in order to be considered for our pure Android collection, which we'll have more on soon. We've got a few likely candidates, which may be maybe getting unveiled soon. Unveiled? That's not a word. Unveiled.
I assumed it was British.
Maybe it is, but either way, I don't know it. Shall we switch back?
Sure.
This is awesome. All right.
We had like half an hour to review these slides. How did we not catch this?
Longer than that. So this is profile widget. So they've got a dashboard pattern, which is a bit of a shame, particularly because one of the key things for me on all of these apps is that they need to work well on tablets, because there are tablets with NFC, and I use those just as much as my phone. So it doesn't work quite as well. It also means that the learning curve is much higher than it should be. I started this app off, and this is the page that I get, and it's not obvious to me, what do I do here? Like profile, widget, I don't really understand how to get going. And as you navigate through the app, it doesn't really get any clearer. It's kind of hard to understand, and I'll show you that when we bring up the giant phone in a moment. One thing that I really did want to point out is they have a really nice toast. So because it's all sort of automated, you can press a widget, you don't have an activity to show information, you need to use something like a toast. And they've customized their toasts really well, with they've added color or background, so it's not just sort of that general standard generic toast which pops up. So I thought
And this
that
is
was
one of the few places where a toast is truly appropriate.
exactly, and it's nice to see that they have used it appropriately and prettied it up as well, which is great. So let's jump to the Giant phone really quickly. So if we have a look at profile widget here, you can see straight away, like if we go back to the main page. So the way it works is you go into your profiles, and then there's activate profiles and create and edit. And what you actually want to do for most cases is either create or edit a profile. Reordering and activating are sort of secondary functions. If we go into editing day, then we end up with this screen. So we're already having to sort of navigate deep into the innards of the app. And at this point, we can do things like change the icons, modify the sound, connection, and screen. So one of the other, I guess, not necessarily issues, but observations about this phone, this app, is it doesn't have quite the same level of control that the others do. So you can't do things, you can turn on and off Wi-Fi, but you can't specify a Wi-Fi network to connect to, for example. So it's a little bit more limited in its functionality there. As well, once you actually have it set up, it creates this really nice widget on the home screen, which is great. Again, they've put a lot of time into the design effort of making sure that the things you actually use a lot look nice. And so if I click on the widget, lets me choose a profile to activate, displays it in the nice little toast, and then changes the actual widget so it can see what profile you're in. So the expectation here is really much more sort of that older approach of defining a profile for your phone, where you basically want to say night mode, day mode, at home mode, Wi-Fi on mode, whatever it is, and
I think
toggle between them.
people certainly get used to that. I mean, we've got airplane mode, for instance,
Absolutely.
night and day mode, work mode, home mode. So those all make sense, and I like that. It's probably worth mentioning that Tasker, for instance, and most of the other profile apps also offer widgets.
Yes.
If that's what you're into. It's just that they focus most of their efforts on the more interesting conditional stuff.
Exactly. And so I think there is a niche for an app like this, which makes it provides a much smaller, simpler subset for the most common, so the 80% of things which people want to do: turn up screen brightness, mute volume, change ringtones.
Well, if I was trying to do this for my mom, this is exactly what I would use, because I don't want to have to do tech support for the set of profiles and conditions that I wrote to figure out if she's at work or not.
Yeah.
If she has a problem with that, I'd rather that she just presses a button, because the code that I can write in their script is not going to be nearly accurate enough to cover all the cases, and if it ever fails, she's not going to be able to fix it.
Exactly. So this is kind of nice. So the downside here for this app is that it's simpler once you understand how to use it, but that learning curve to understand how you're setting up your profiles, where that happens, how you place a widget, the actual process of putting your widget on the home screen and choosing like how it's going to choose between the different profiles you've set up is a little bit harder and less intuitive than it should be. So that's, I think, the key for these guys, is to really try and make that process as simple and easy to do.
Well, I think we knew this show was going to run long because these are such complex apps, but let's go ahead and talk a little bit now, wrap it up and see what all of these apps should be doing.
Absolutely. So we kind of introduced this stuff at the beginning. We wanted to do as much as possible. We want it to be easy to use. We want it to work on tablets. And tablets, I guess, is one which I do want to bring up because I think they've all been designed for phones, which makes sense. But we really want to try and emphasize how much people should be thinking about doing those things. And so step one is really creating a great responsive design so that the app is going to look good and work great on any device that you happen to be using. It doesn't matter what orientation you're in, it doesn't matter whether it's a tablet, whether it's a phone, whatever it is, it should just adapt and work well. And similarly, you want to create that great tablet-specific experience. And even if you're not planning to do anything tablet-specific, it should still work. You shouldn't have to worry that, oh, actually, on my Nexus 7 it doesn't work and I have to mount it differently in my car or paste the NFC tag in a different place. And so really, you want to optimize in all ways. And in fact, there can be opportunities to take it a step further. Now, we can see that the NFC Task Launcher is providing some statistics. That sort of stuff works really well on a tablet where you may want to sit down and, or indeed for Tasker, where you're having to create GUIs and those sorts of things. Like that on my phone, not so much. That on a tablet, well, I think we'd all kind of like to be able to write code on a tablet. Maybe this is the first step.
Yeah, giving yourself a little more space is always a good thing. Although one thing you should also remember when you're going between tablets and phones is that most people have both devices. If they have a tablet, they almost certainly have a phone.
Absolutely.
And so being able to create something on one device and use it on another device or on all of your devices is also a feature I would really like to see.
Absolutely. I guess it's the other side of that community repository. I want my own repository.
Bingo.
It's like I've created it. I want to apply this to all of my devices. So it would be really, really nice.
All right, so before we sign off, let's take a look at our prescriptions for each app to help them move towards a pure Android experience. Do we put that in scare quotes?
I think until we actually launch it, yes.
Oh,
Once
probably,
it's launched,
yeah.
then we lose the scare quotes.
Awesome. All right. So the prescription we have for Tasker is first a UI makeover.
Yeah.
I think it needs one. It deserves one. It's a wonderful program, and it'd be nice if it
Yeah,
if
don't
it looked
sell yourself
nicer.
short. Like
Yeah.
it's a great app with huge amounts of functionality. It just looks like it's old, and give it the Hollow makeover.
Exactly, and lose the dialogues. More than
Yes,
anything else,
absolutely.
this is what makes the program hard to use. It puts you in a very modal position, so it's difficult to quickly edit things because you have to jump in and out of modes. I'd love to see a tablet version where I could see multiple conditions, multiple contexts, and multiple tasks all laid out where I could tweak each one of them.
Oh, that would be beautiful. Yeah.
They definitely need a repository. The
Yeah.
wiki is awesome, but only if you're willing to really work at something. Some of the competitors out there actually have something where the first thing you do is press a button, or even you don't even need to press a button. You just see popular tasks or popular contexts or popular profiles that other people have defined. And it turns out, when I went looking, that everything that I wanted to do had already been defined, and all that I need to do is change the location or change the
Couple of
time.
variables. Yeah.
So let's get that in. I think that if that was in the app, it would be a winner. It would be hands down my favorite profile app.
Nice.
But finally, I think that you could have a little bit more appropriate feature discovery. Things like variables that are very important, like if I want to see what speed I'm going, for instance, are very difficult to discover. You have to drill all the way in to a condition, and then sometimes you have to type in the variable name, but sometimes you can select it from a list. And that's very, very odd, especially since there are about 100 different built-in variables that let you check different things on your phone. It's really, really nice. But then again, you've got the Scenes feature, which is an app builder. It's an IDE, which most of the users of this particular application will probably not use. It's a niche feature, and yet it's given a very prominent position on the very first page. So it's not about making things more or less discoverable, it's making them more appropriately discoverable.
That makes a lot of sense. For NFC Task Launcher, like I said, they've actually done a lot of the things that I was hoping for. I think there is still a little bit of work to be done in navigation, and that's maybe something that you guys can find out exactly if I am a one-off case, or if a lot of people are having the same problems using analytics. Find out how many times people are accidentally exiting out of your app. Don't put up a "Are you sure you want to exit" dialogue. That is not a solution. That is just an indication that your navigation is more confusing than it needs to be. I'd love to see icons for my tags because they look really nice on that front page. The icons exist. I copied a profile which had an icon associated with it, so having those there available for my own apps would be really nice. What I've said here is avoid duplicative actions, because when I wrote this, I thought that finish and done did the same thing. As it turns out, they don't. So do check out the way that app affordances are supposed to work and make sure that that's consistent with the way that the platform has been designed.
And in general, try to avoid using verbs as app titles, because they will show up as if they were buttons to a lot of people.
Absolutely. Even experienced Android users like myself can get confused.
Indeed.
And also take a leaf out of Profile Widget. They've done a really nice job customizing their toasts. I've seen other apps which have really rich notifications. So we do use both of those things in this app to notify you that the profile has changed. So maybe spend a little bit of the awesome design work that you've done throughout the rest of the app just to make those final couple of pieces a little bit more polished.
But remember, for those of you at home watching this, do not make toasts for any other reason. Toasts that say, please don't press that button again, no.
This is a perfect example of where toasts are useful and are appropriate.
Right, because it's a short-lived notification. It's a notification. You need to be notified if you're paying attention. You do not need to be notified later. You do not need the notification to persist. And you don't need to pop up its own activity.
Exactly, and the good job that they've done here as well is that both toasts and notifications are optional. So it doesn't necessarily, if you don't want to have anything pop up or appear in your notification tray, it won't. And the last app, the profile widget, it's a little bit simpler, so we don't have as much feedback. Really make that getting started as simple as possible. If you take a leaf out of some of the other apps here, particularly an FC Task Launcher, to say, well, here are the most common things. You press this button once, and make that part of the flow. So when I drop the widget onto the home screen, basically just give me a list of either existing or new profiles that I want to associate with it, so that it's click, click, done. And then I can worry about customizing it and everything afterwards, but I need to understand how it works as quickly as I can. And maybe revisit the dashboard pattern, particularly because even on a phone, if I rotate it into landscape mode, it doesn't fit. I end up doing mini scrolling, which is a little uncomfortable. So, that is all for us today. Don't forget to tune in to Roman, Nick, and Adam for Android Design in Action next Tuesday, when hopefully they'll be setting their design skills loose on some of the apps we looked at today.
Absolutely, and we'll be back again next week to look at sleep monitoring apps.
Which will make a nice change from having Ian monitoring my sleep every evening, which is getting a little creepy.
Yeah, it's also a really difficult job, and I'm very tired in the morning.
Yeah.
So if you've got a device profile app you'd like us to take a look at,
be sure to hit our Trello page.
Absolutely. I think we meant sleep app, though. I meant sleep app.
I don't know what you said because I wasn't listening.
I said the thing that you wrote, and it was wrong.
The thing which we didn't update. Right. Well, yeah, so if you have a sleep monitoring app, or any of the other categories, we've got ebook readers coming up in a couple of weeks. There's a whole bunch of options there. So go to bit.ly/appclinictrello and get your votes and your self-nominations in. We love to review apps from people who have written them and asked for us to take a look at them. It's the easiest way for us to be able to really have an impact on what you guys are doing.
Exactly, and we hate people calling in to complain later that we reviewed their apps without their permission, so please don't post an app unless there's a way for us to get in touch with the author.
Absolutely. So until then, thank you for watching. My name is Redo Meyer.
And I'm Ian Nee Lewis.
And this has been the App Clinic.
Thanks for watching.